Hello, Gretchen. How are you?
Hi, Ari. How are you?
I'm doing
So,
great.
such a long time.
Right? Thank you so much actually for joining me today in this webinar. We have been getting, so many questions about different teachers and different professionals in the area regarding these two topics that I know that you're an expert about, new directions in syllabus and curriculum design, and also about needs analysis. So we're going to get started. We have already many questions, believe it or not, from many people. And it's important that maybe we start just tackling those questions, and those doubts that our colleagues from the English teaching field have. So I would like to go well and get started and ask you the first question that we have, and it's in
Okay.
regarding to the background of English teaching. So first question for you would be, when did the teaching of English become more active? What can you tell us about that?
I think it was around World War II that there was a lot of immigration and the foreigners. They created a lot of demand on the U.S. and UK, Canada, and Australia. And after 1950s, there was a boom in travel and tourism, and English became so important for trade and commerce. Imagine people like they were traveling, and some others were doing lots of transactions, and they needed one language in common.
Mhm.
So there was a need to find new methodologies, like meet the changing needs of the learners. So I guess around 1950s and the 60s, those were times of methodological excitement. So they needed new things.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, back in the day, that was really important. Is when English actually, arose, right, and became very important and
Mhm.
popular. Hmm.
Yeah, actually, I saw also that we had lots of questions. So I guess they were paying lots of attention.
Yeah,
And I'm so glad that they're so interested in the history of English teaching. So, well, I'm gonna ask you a question that came up.
absolutely.
Which methods were considered at that time?
Yes, well, I remember that in Britain, so we had the situational language
Mhm.
teaching. That was a methodology that was carefully graded, that carefully actually graded grammatical and lexical syllabuses. So that was important, replaced also others that focus a lot on drill-based methodologies. And then we had the famous one that I'm pretty sure that you know about this one. That is the autolingual method that was actually used during the times of the war in order to help individuals learn the language pretty fast. And it was actually a method based on repetition, a lot of repetition, a lot of drills. So, dialogues, for example, because they needed to expedite the process of these people learning the language. So, it was a lot of memory also involved, in repetition. There
Mhm.
were many changes, right, back in the day in Europe, and these two methods were very
Mhm.
important at that time.
Um,
Autolingual was mostly in the US, like in the 60s.
You know what I remember from this that you're right is that the first, like let's say, bots came up at that time because
Mhm.
they needed like machines that would reply and they would do lots of repetition. So the first, let's say, automation in English came up by that time.
You're right. Hmm. That's true. And it became because of the autolingual method. Hmm.
Mhm.
Alrighty. Now, I have another question for you, talking about the Council of Europe. So, in which way did this Council of Europe come up with a new way of organizing teaching? Which method was important?
You'll see motivation as it is seen today wasn't really considered. They just wanted to see how people learn and which language it was, and maybe some sort of evaluation to see which results were missing. So around the 1970s, there was a reevaluation of the language teaching policy in those European countries, and it was necessary to determine the um, which foreign languages
Mhm.
should have been taught in schools. So they introduced little by little some languages in the curriculum, and then they decided to do it, let's say, once or twice a week, because that wasn't really established before. So there were some questions like how many languages are necessary to be learned. And
Mhm.
you'll see that nowadays, lots of European countries teach many languages at the same time. And they do it like at some age, they go like first one language and then at a certain age another language and so on. And they also needed to know which skills were necessary to acquire. So the
Mhm.
Council of Europe proposed a unit credit system that was used as a framework to develop language teaching for adults. It was that during this period that the communicative language teaching emerged as a new direction for language teaching. So this helped a lot in re-examining the goals, the nature, and the process of the teaching. And it was so necessary to
Mhm.
know about the learner's needs as a starting point in
Mhm.
order to reevaluate this. And once the needs were identified, then we had the targets and so on.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it was a little bit, but maybe you could add a little more about this communicative language teaching method.
Absolutely, yes. That's a very important approach, right? That it actually emerged from all these changes that were happening in the world and with the teaching of English. Actually, the centrality of grammar in language teaching back in the day was a lot, right? And it was questioned because the attention shifted directly to ways of developing language programs that focus more on communication, in that type of communication that is necessary for people, to talk to different native speakers, in different types of contexts. And as we have it here, for example, in the screen, greater consideration was given to how language is used by speakers in different contexts of communication. So the idea was to centralize everything to communication, rather than the mastery of the grammatical system of the language. The communicative competence that we know, right? That is basically that capacity of the learner in order to communicate appropriately in different settings, in different circumstances with different types of users. So, and this is the communicative language teaching. I have used it, in my classes. I'm pretty sure that you have too, right? Because it's a very important approach that we have been using since then. And talking about this one, Gre, was there another method considered to achieve competence during the
Uh,
60s, 70s?
Actually, it was. And I wasn't aware of it until, let's say, a couple of years that they had the notional syllabus.
Hmm.
It was proposed by Wilkins, and it contained three kinds of categories of meaning. One was the semantic grammatical meaning, then the model meaning, and the communicative function. The semantic one and the model meaning, they had like grammatical contracts and some concepts. And the communicative function, as we know it, is it was like speech acts, requesting, complaining, apologizing, complimenting, making suggestions. So we are not that far from that because I believe that we still use it somehow.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was quite interesting to know this.
Hmm.
Um, Later, there was a big concern about addressing learners' needs. And
Hmm.
this is quite important because I think everything changed from here. So, how did this movement arise and what was the importance? Yeah.
Yes, great question. Actually, there was a need, to prepare non-native speakers because of immigration and all these different changes, to study both in the U.S. and also in the U.K. in different universities, and also to prepare them for specific jobs and for specific occupations. So, like in the early 1950s, around that time, the language courses developed in the U.S. I'm sorry, address language patterns and vocabulary. Throughout the 60s, it was realized that it was needed for this type of learners. No more lessons in advanced English, because that is what it was happening when they saw that a person needed to communicate for a specific job or for a specific need. People, teachers in general, were given classes that were more about advanced English and about colloquial English, but not so much about the needs of that specific group of people. So it changed a little bit to what we know as English for specific purposes, or ESP. That actually in the 60s they saw the need of starting, this revolution, making sure that we understood, for example, the needs of this population, that there was a needs analysis that we're going to see it very soon, in trying to find, for example, identify word frequency, well, words, right, frequency, and then counts, and also discourse analysis, and making sure that we could analyze also the communication that these people needed in the workplace. And talking about that, now that you mentioned this English for specific purposes, right, that we have right here, and it is so important. I remember that we had the possibility, right, of working together, creating an ESP course for psychologists. And the whole experience of creating one course from scratch is very interesting to find, for example, the needs of a specific group of people. It requires a lot of work. It's not an easy task to do because you need to definitely understand their needs, sit down with different stakeholders, and then start creating that, even the materials from scratch, because there are many materials that you cannot find just, for example, on the web. You have to start thinking about the content, the type of vocabulary, the type of grammatical structures, and based on that, you go ahead and you create the syllabus, right, in the curriculum. Now, also in the line of English for specific purposes, we have actually here some questions from the audience. And the three of them talked about the difference between ESP versus EGP. The other one is what is register? And the other one will be what is discourse analysis? And I know that you're the right person to answer these questions. So could you help us here, Gray?
Thank you, Eddie. I enjoyed designing that program as well. It was a lot of hard work, and mm, not all the careers have like this idea that they need to learn English for specific purposes, and maybe because they don't see the reality of the rest of the people who don't speak, let's say, Spanish, and they need to construct that need in the population. Okay, I do speak English, so you can come to me and I'm going to help you. I'm going to be available for those who speak English. So basically, ESP teaching approach is a learner centered approach where the learner's needs and their goals are the supreme value. On the other side, general English approach is language centered, and it focuses on learning a language from a whole perception, covering the language skills, the cultural aspects of the speaking community. So maybe
Mhm,
that would answer your first question.
mhm,
On the other side, in 1970s, the ESP approach drew on register analysis. A variety of language was determined according to the use. So register analysis studies the language, like let's say in the field specifically, like
mhm,
what we said, psychology, then we have journalism, medicine, law, and different with different patterns of vocabulary that is specific for them, and noun phrases and tense usage. For example, they need to write letters, and they also have to read lots of academic books, and they also have to write in a technical way. And then we have discourse analysis, which is the analysis of the units of organization within the text. Let's say the narratives, instructions, business letters, or even speech events.
mhm,
So it has a rhetorical organization, like it has a definition, identification, comparison, in analysis, everything in a communicative context, and it affects the language use. So there is a there is a relationship between the discourse, the speakers, and the listeners in order to gather the or to understand the meaning or the message.
mhm,
Um, so these two concepts, the last two, register and discourse analysis, were the basis for the first generation of ESP courses in the 70s. See, they're pretty old, and
Mhm.
right now, 2021, not all the fields have ESP, at least not in our country.
True.
So, other approaches to studying the features of authentic spoken and written text later emerged, like corpus analysis, text analysis, and conversation analysis, and so on. So,
Mhm. That is very interesting. Now that you mention it, I remember that when we were developing the course for psychologists, do you remember that we checked textbooks and that in those textbooks we look up for specific vocabulary, specific grammatical structures that they were using? And that also we analyzed once a dialogue where two professionals in the language were in the field, I'm sorry, were communicating. So that's basically what you're talking about here. Register in discourse analysis is trying to find within those emails, within business letters, textbooks, even for example, information that they send to each other or communication in dialogues. You try to find a specific chunks of language that they use in that field, so then we can apply that in our curriculum and make sure that we teach that to the students so it makes sense to them.
yeah, and also from all those books that we read specific of the field, and also from the interviews that we made, we got a huge list of high frequency words, which
Yes.
is so important because I think it is like the basis, like to start with an ESP program.
Mhm.
So, would you please tell us a little bit, Ari, about the needs analysis specifically? Why is it so important, and what is the role of the learner in the needs analysis?
Yeah. In the needs analysis for an ESP course, this is the core actually of the course per se of the program. Because in ESP, you actually need to make sure that you understand, first of all, who are your students, what do they need, what type of language they need for communication in their workplace, or let's say if we're talking about people, for example, who are in vocational scenarios or in vocational contexts. So we need to understand what do exactly they need, because there is a big difference of they probably handle already English for general purposes. They know how to interact with other people face to face. They know, for example, how to ask for a coffee. They, for example, can communicate in an airport. But whenever, for example, if we're thinking about a psychologist, whenever this person needs to talk to a patient and this patient has to provide specific information about the disease or about, this, I don't know, it could be in educational backgrounds, it could be about autism, or we can say about different types of learning disabilities. This psychologist needs not only to understand that language, but also should be able to produce it, right? To talk back to the person, to actually write down information, and so on and so forth. So it's definitely very important for not only the ESP practitioner, but also for the learner, to be able to have the vocabulary that is necessary in order to carry out a specific task, and to prepare them. That's our job, to make sure that we prepare the students in order to be ready, in order to well, to provide help to their clients in case of, I don't know, if we have psychologists or if we're dealing with specific types of occupations. So I think that will be like the main role of the learner, and also definitely needs analysis should be the core of an ESP program. And now, thinking about that, can you tell me about the two dimensions of needs analysis described by Mumby?
There were two dimensions described by Mumpy. The first one is to is the procedures used to specify the target level of communicative competence. Okay, and then the procedures uh, that we're going to use to get that information and convert it into an ESP syllabus. So imagine that we have to analyze the situation, identify which tasks we're going to construct, the activities, the skills that the learners are going to need or they're going to develop during the course, and also discourse analysis. What is the language that they are really going to use, and analysis in relation to the demands of the situation. Also, identification of motivation, how do my students learn, and then put them into context. Identify those factors from the environment that are going to make our course fluent.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Absolutely.
um, um, there was something that Tyler introduced called backward design, or backward design approach in
Mhm.
1949. So, can you tell us a little bit about what he proposed?
Yes, thank you. Actually, this backward design is still used. He proposed actually four fundamental issues that at the moment I'm pretty sure that many curriculum designers are using. First of all, is to start with aims and objectives. Then the second one is to go with the content. Then we go with organization. And at the end, we go with evaluation. So when I say this, pretty much I'm talking about first, we go with the need. That is tied to the aims and the objectives. Then we go with the plan that we have. So, what are going to be the strategies that we're going to be using? What are going to be the tactics? Then we go with the implementation of the program. Those will be the methods, the techniques that we're going to be using. And finally, we make a review. And then that's when we go with evaluation or consolidation. And I can tell you, Greta, there were many critics for this backward design, and they still are. They, for example, think that there was a limited view of knowledge, and then some advocate a more process oriented approach. Actually, some believe, for example, that this approach is more for business, not well, not so much for education, but more for business or for industry. And also some other disliked, and as I showed you, is very linear. So some really did not like this linear approach that is implied in the model, which at the end, if you saw, it leaves evaluation until the very end. So it had, even though it has been widely used in curriculum design, it is still has many critics, right? And many people who have been, not so happy, let's say, with the approach. So there are others, but well, we can have that conversation later. And then I have a question for you, that is also, now we can jump in, since I know that we're short in time. We can go and talk about the needs analysis. That is a very important topic in curriculum design. So my first question for you in this one, and I see it actually has been repeated from the audience, is what does the term needs encompass? Which points of view does it hold?
Well, needs analysis was introduced into language teaching through the ESP approach. Like, it was around 1960s. They needed specialized language programs to grow. And yeah, the critics, um, they always exist, and I think they help us improve. But they are right. Many times this is used for business, or even um, for industry,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that's mostly how we use it in the within our country. But
Mm-hmm.
um, the needs is the needs are actually the desires, the expectations, what motivates the learner, what lacks at the same time, because they always they also teach something that they don't know already, and some constraints and those requirements that they need in order to develop. And we need to see this as the core, as you said before. It is the core of the ESP course, because we don't get a book of ESP and say we're going to teach this to our students. It doesn't work that
Mm-hmm.
way. We need to gather that information. Okay, what is it that they exactly need in order to perform in their field? Okay, and what do they expect from the course at the same time?
Mhm.
What is it that they don't know in order to work, and also what motivates them. Because you're not going to have like robots just repeating or memorizing things. No, they're going to interact. So it is so important to do this in the right way, because it's not only the students. We're going to have stakeholders as well, and we're also going to interview probably professors or specialists in the field, because we're just language learners,
Mhm.
language teachers, sorry. There are other specialists. We're going to transmit um, and the information from their field. And so it is really important that it is done in a small scale.
Mhm.
Okay, and the teachers from the field need to know from their students, and the English teachers as well, or in the larger scale, that we're going to create one course that, believe it or not, is going to go to another country, and they're going to use it as well. Maybe they're going to modify it according to their needs,
Mhm.
but we create a whole database of information every time we make a needs analysis. So yes, it is so important. And if we don't make the right or construct the right needs analysis, the goals and the content, activities, and so on, will start failing over the course.
Mhm. Sounds like a baseline, for curriculum
Mhm.
design. Mhm.
And maybe you could tell us what happens, because we know that we have like ESP,
Mhm.
but then we have some students who don't really have a purpose for studying English. So we've been talking a lot about fields of study, like
Mhm.
specific careers. But what about those who study the language but don't really have a purpose?
Mhm. Well, probably that's the majority of the people, right? And that we have in our country, because we have plenty of children, we have plenty of teenagers who attend a school, and actually they have just to get English, or they have to study it because it's part of the curriculum of the national curriculum of the country. But what I would tell teachers is always, when you have this type of cases, which is, as I said, the majority, is to choose activities and content that are appropriate for those students, for their age, also for their sociocultural experiences. To be also very careful that when you choose the activities, you actually understand, that these kids, obviously they don't need English right away. They don't even know if they will need English at some point. So just to make sure that you get to know your students. So there are some approaches that teachers should use with the teenagers and with the young learners that I can also give you a piece of advice. So I would say that it's important to know, for example, your students' current proficiency level in English, also their previous language experiences, because, for example, if you're a teacher in eighth grade, you know that you had another colleague who was with them in seventh grade. So you can obtain perhaps the information about the type of activities that they used to have with the other teacher, and the learning experiences, language experiences in general. It's important to know their wants. It's important to know their needs. And it's important to know, for example, if they like something specifically, how they like to learn, the kinds of topics and activities that they prefer to have, because that is going to give them a lot of motivation. And I remember that when I was working with students, with teenagers, many many years ago, I used even to ask them, like, what type of music do you like? Do you like to watch series in Netflix, or do you like to watch specific cartoons? Because based on that, I try to make some activities where I could bring also things that they liked, and I saw their motivation right away. The kinds of problems, for example, they experience when they learn English. And obviously, you need to understand their motivations to learn, if they have any, their thinking styles, their learning styles, their preferences, even skills that they want to improve. Because you never know when you have, for example, older students like in 10th grade, 11th grade, they might already want to study English at some point, and they would like for perhaps to improve a specific skill, maybe grammar, maybe reading, maybe speaking. So it's important to know that, as well as the social needs, personality, interests, gender, culture. All of that is important for sure. And now, another question that I have for you, Gre, maybe now we can jump in and talk about some other questions that you have from the audience. Is about what are exactly goals of the needs analysis? Who are the users in the needs analysis, and what is going to be our target population?
Thank you so much, Ari. I get like so excited with this topic
Yes.
of needs analysis, and I can tell you that the goals of needs analysis is that to understand the context in which they will use it. For
Mhm,
example, the one we did in psychology. Okay, when and where are they going to use it? Well, in a clinic with patients, they're just going to teach psychology, or they are going to do like observations, or just run those questionnaires and tests to analyze, or just to give a report. Or okay, and which language skills the learner needs. Okay, are they going to talk with people, like interactional,
mhm,
or are they going just to read research, so they would need more written, or are they going to talk to audience? So we need to know which skill, and which ones are mm, like mm, more important, because
mhm,
yes, some fields require the use of some skills more. Let's say that I'm going to teach ESP to tour guides, so they need lots of speaking, listening, and speaking. But they
mhm,
also need writing and reading, because they need to research, but not as much as they need listening and speaking. And also the activities that they're going to develop outside the class, like I said before, like questionnaires and just speaking, and the gap between what they know already and what they don't know, because sometimes it is easier to teach English to students who already have a background
mhm,
in certain field, because it's easier for them to create an image in their minds, and then okay, they internalize it, and then they have certain output. But then we also have students who may not know as much, so we also need to take this into account. And their learning styles, which is something so important, because not everybody learns the same uh, style. And then uh, what the stakeholders think about these needs, because they might have another point of view different from the students. And also which difficulties they have, and which is the real potential of the students. And because they're expected to have like the similar language level, so we also need to know at which extent they do, and where do you need to reinforce it.
mhm,
And the users, teachers, um, writers who prepare books, testing personals, like the ones who design tests, um, people from, let's say, from institutions like the MEP, who design curriculum.
mhm,
Um, yes, and the target population, hmm, people about whom information will be collected. In language program, the learners or the potential learners, but also people who write the policies, the minister of education, teachers, advisors, employers, and why not the community, the parents, and I think they're all involved in this
mhm.
process.
They should.
Um, I'd love to hear a little bit. because they said that they would like to start working
Mhm.
on, let's say, a needs analysis like project. So could you tell us a little bit about the procedures?
Mhm. Thank you. Yes, there are many different procedures. For example, there is one that is called triangulation. And for triangulation, we have to make sure that when we collect the information, and I'm going to be talking about those different techniques, but that we consider not just one specific technique, but we consider different types of sources. So it could be more reliable, it could be more valid. But in terms of the procedures, any type of analysis of available information, for example, I remember that when we did our needs analysis for this ESP program, we actually look up for books. We had, for example, different type of journals from the students. We actually had surveys. We had different types of files, and that could be very beneficial, right? Because from there you can start your analysis of discourse analysis. You can start analyzing the frequency of words. Then also expert advice. You know, the different experts from the different fields can help you out a lot. Questionnaires are very beneficial and very common, easy to tabulate, very easy to handle at the same time and to analyze. I would say also learner diaries and journals. So if you could have this information from the users themselves, that could be also very good. The same as interviews. We performed interviews, if you remember, with these psychologists, like around 7 or 8 different interviews. And at the end, you can obtain a lot of good information from this type of source. The same as, for example, meetings. If you can have meetings with them, now that we're in the virtual world, obviously you can have this type of meetings in Meet, right? You can just talk to them directly, which will be faster than moving directly, as we had in the past, to go to the specific place of the student. Then observations are amazing. I have done them before, like for example at work. Sometimes I sit right next to the agents who take calls from the service desk, and I listen to their calls. I listen, for example, to the way that they interact, to the type of vocabulary they use, the type of writing, for example, that they have to do in tickets, and that is also very good. The same as shadowing, but shadowing requires you to be almost right next to the person all day long. So it could be very complicated, because that means that you have to be there with that person, following the person during the whole day, which I know that it could be sometimes a little bit difficult if, for example, you don't work for the same place as your student. But also, you can collect different types of samples, as I said, even written samples, phone calls, if it's possible that they have been recorded, so you can take that also, and case analysis, which could be also very beneficial if, in the case of business, for example, business administration, they have lots of case analysis. And there are so many, but the idea, Gre, and that's what I would say, is that triangulation is very important here, because if you got the information from questionnaires or from observations, from textbooks, all of that could be has to be taken into account, and also interviews with different stakeholders. So your at the end, your needs analysis is going to be very valid and is going to actually tackle the needs of the group of professionals that you're going to be working with. And last but not least, I know that we are about to finish with this webinar, and I would like to thank you again. Can you just tell me here, what do we do, for example, with all the information that we have just collected, let's say? What do we do with that information? And also, how do we apply those findings now to our curriculum?
Thank you, Annie. I think I started a little before talking about this, um, but I would like to add that we have to remember about those high frequency words, because it's like so important that we collect that information. And again, like the situations where it's going to be used. Okay, which difficulties we found,
Mhm.
and what are we going to do with that? And also, we need to establish. I told you before that they might not have the same level, but we need to establish which is the desired target level,
Mhm.
because there's always a top that we want to get to. So, um, also, some communication problems that you might encounter, opinions about what the learner is facing, and I think it's much of it, and but how do we apply this? We're gonna prioritize the needs
Hmm.
because remember it's the core, and the current curriculum has to be examined to see if the needs have been identified and if they are being met, because there's no point in gathering information and not doing anything with it, and
Hmm.
decide which of the needs are critical, because we might get a whole bunch of needs, but which ones are critical, so which ones are more desirable, and with that information analyzed, then we're going to see if it suits the group of interest, because remember that we might use it as well with other groups, or we take one part of needs results from other needs analysis, and then we're going to conduct another needs analysis, and then we're going to see if it suits. Otherwise, we're gonna go and run the whole um, process again, which is like, um, I mean, it is. mm, I think that is basic to do it from zero with your group. But I
Absolutely.
think that was much of what they asked, and I believe that if they have more questions, they can always come to us. I know we're gonna be so happy to talk about this.
Absolutely. We love
And
this.
yeah, and I'm so glad you really called me, because we've been working together on this for such a long time, and yeah, I know you're an expert, and so I totally trust you on this.
Same to you, Gre. Thank you so much, actually, for taking this time during this night, and I appreciate it. And thank you very much for to the audience for listening. If you have more questions, you can just send it to us. Thank you, and have a good night, everybody.
Good night. Good night. Bye bye.
Bye bye.